So today's video is all going to be about the quick change cameras, the 35III, the SR, and the Aaton XTRs and LTRs. Anything that's got a quick change magazine that comes on and off. It's all very, very similar. Okay, there's minor differences, but we're going to focus on these type of cameras, and then we'll do another video on the studio cameras at a later date. So let's first preface this by having a camera that's built, okay? So this is our kind of built studio rig, okay? With a matte box that swings out, right? So that we can get to our lens and all that stuff. This is a very typical way of doing things. We got a little follow focus motor on here and stuff like that, And the tools we're gonna use are Kim wipes. I only have a big box of Kim wipes, but you can get a small box too. A duster and a Q-tip. And mind the fact the Q-tip's on the table. We don't really necessarily need glass cleaner or anything like that when cleaning things and just checking things over. It's not quite necessary, but a good lens cleaner is definitely a good idea. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna find out whether or not the shot you just did, the gate is clean on, okay? Check the gate is the key word. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up our matte box, we're gonna slide our follow focus out of the way, and we're gonna take our lens off, okay? So here's our lens. We're gonna cap the lens, so the lens has got a cap on it. We're gonna cap the lens, so the lens has a cap on it, so we're not getting dirt on it. And then what we're gonna do is we're going to move the camera to test mode, and we're gonna look down here in the gate, and we're gonna look at our film. So obviously, you don't know about what's happened before this moment or after this moment, but if there is a hair trapped in the gate, you might see it now. So you want to look in there with a flashlight, and you want to look around the outside of the gate where you can see the emulsion, and you want to make sure there's no hairs or dirt in the gate. That's called checking the gate, okay? Very simple process. And then, of course, you'd put the lens back on again, and you close the matte box back, and you're good to go. So now that we've checked the gate, because that's the process of checking the gate, we're now going to go ahead and we're going to pull the magazine off, and we're going to pretend that it's time to clean the camera. So magazine comes off the back of the camera, and just for the sake of being able to get further access into the camera, we're going to pull the entire battery system off this camera. So now we can see the entire gate. And what I'm going to do really quickly is pull this matte box off so it's completely out of our way, because we don't need this anymore. And now we can see our entire gate of our camera, okay? So now the gate in the 35III is really easy to clean. We're gonna start by spraying some canned air up and down the sides. And you don't wanna spray it into the hole, you wanna spray down the sides, right? And then what we want to do is we want to kind of clean the emulsion off of the edges, okay? So the rails on both sides get built up emulsion. So a lot of times what I'll do is spray this down with some lens cleaner, but if you don't have any handy, that's fine. And you're just going to rub this up and down the rail, right? So that if there's any loose junk on the rail or any gunk, we can pick it up with our Q-tip. And there's actually some emulsion on there. So on the 35III, there's a spring-loaded guide right here. And this spring-loaded guide is what keeps the film held in place laterally. It just gives it a little bit of a squeeze so that when the pull-down claw releases from the bottom of its travel, the film doesn't kind of move when that happens. Because these things are moving very, very fast, 24 frames a second. The film has a lot of time to kind of wiggle. So this spring-loaded system keeps the film kind of pinched in place. It's not perfect. These cameras have not as good registration as a camera that has a registration pin, but the registration is actually pretty good for what they are. So you got to make sure that that's working. So what we usually do is we really clean this area up. We kind of push it in and clean it up really, really good with our Q-tip here. And make sure that there's no debris and that spring is working perfectly. We want that to work really, really good, no problems. As you can see, it got some dirt on it. So now, one other trick that I use, using a small Kim wipe instead of a thick Kim wipe, is to take my fingernail and rub it up and down the gate. So I want to rub it up and down the side rails. And that's another way to kind of clean it off if you don't have any Q-tips around, okay? A fingernail with a wet Kim wipe works the best, actually. And so I'll go ahead and rub this up and down the rails to make sure that the rails don't have any gunk on them. And I'll also make sure that the aperture plate itself, which is where the film is being exposed, is also free of any debris. Now, Kim wipes do leave a little bit of some residue. They're not perfect. So when we're done with this, we do have to spray it down. Just an FYI. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean the other side and make sure that all of the guides and everything are clean, being very cautious not to push the pull down claw at all, because the pull down claws are very fragile on all these cameras, so don't push the pull down claw. Be very cautious about that. And then finally, as my final last bit, I will take my duster again and I will spray the whole thing down again and make sure that there's no dust on anything. And that's it. Now, the other thing we can do at the same time is clean the mirror. Now, the mirrored shutter on these cameras, and all cameras for that matter, are very, very fragile, okay? Very, very fragile mirror. They can get scratched and nicked very, very easily, and they do not like being touched with fingerprints, okay? So be mindful of that. You don't want to really touch them if possible. So what I generally do is I will open up the gate like this with my finger. I'll move the mirror out of the way from the center of the mirror, not the glass part. And I will spray through. And I will spray through. And that's one last check of that. Remember, the ground glass is up here in this camera, so you want to kind of clean off the ground glass as well. The ground glass in these cameras come out with your finger or a piece of tape. A lot of guys use tape. You can just use your finger if you want and just clean it to get it out. You basically take a piece of tape or your finger, stick it under the ground glass, and then lift up and the ground glass pulls right out. I'm not going to do it because this camera is very clean right now and I don't want to do it. We had just rebuilt this camera in another video and I don't want to get into taking it out because if I do, I have to recalibrate stuff and I have to clean stuff. So I'm not going to bother, but it comes right out. And remember, there's a beam splitter up here as well, and that gets dirty, but you can't access the beam splitter with your can of air. So if you do have a really dirty beam splitter, which can happen if there's dust getting in here, right? So be careful. You do have to take the front of the camera off and clean it with a compressed air or a Q-tip. The other way you can get to the beam splitter is if it's on the top side of the beam splitter, which is rare, just if the dirt kind of flows up and then settles in the beam splitter, you can take this assembly off. It's only 4 screws. And then you can get down there with a Q-tip and kind of wipe it down with a little bit of some lens cleaner. And it's an easy way to do it. So that's kind of the basic on the camera body itself. Again, the mirror I wouldn't touch. I hate recommending touching the mirror because I wouldn't touch it. I really wouldn't. If you damage the mirror, your camera's just never going to work again, you know? Getting a spare mirror is nearly impossible nowadays for almost any film camera. They're one of the most trickiest parts to manufacture in the camera outside of the viewfinder and the movement. They're very, very tricky to manufacture. They're very also easy to break. And your camera then becomes useless because getting a mirror replacement can be impossible and you have to retime the camera when you get it. It's very expensive. So please, please stay away from touching the mirror. Don't use it to do anything. If you want to move the mirror out of the way, you can touch the bottom metal part of the mirror, but don't ever touch that glass. And if you're going to clean it off, just use a duster and it'll be fine. Let a technician clean the mirror because there's ways you can do it that'll damage it. And there's ways you can do it that will be okay. And I'm afraid if I suggest you guys to do it a certain way, it won't come out good. So be very careful. Now to clean the viewfinder assembly, which is another thing that needs to be cleaned, I just hit it with air. I just hit it with air, and I hit this with air, and I hit this with air. Because what happens is that disassembly come on and off the camera during the day when you're changing to different viewfinders. And this piece of glass will get very, very, very dusty. Now, if you're lucky, you won't get dust inside. But I have found over the years that dust gets on the piece of glass here. And that could be a problem. So just be mindful of that. And so that's basically how you clean that off. Now you can use lens cleaner on these, no problem at all. So if you see a lot of fingerprints or whatever, you can use some lens cleaner and a Kim wipe to wipe those off. Just remember when you're done, you got to spray it down with a duster because, again, you will leave some debris from the Kim wipe on it from what I've seen. And so that's kind of the breakdown. That's how you basically clean the camera. And once the camera's clean, there's a gate cover that goes on here that's magnetic that sticks on here that prevents dust from getting in. Remember that. On the XTRs and on the Aries as well, there's a seal that seals the magazine to the camera. And on certain cameras, the seal's on the camera side, and certain cameras, the seal's on the magazine side. You want to make sure that that seal's intact. On the 35III, the seal's on the camera side. It's this double rubber seal that goes all the way around the inside of the camera here. Very, very important for that seal to be intact. On the XTR magazines, it's on the magazine side. On a lot of the ARRI cameras, it's on the camera side as well. So just be mindful of that. Make sure that seal's in good shape, because if you have a leak in that seal, you're going to have a very small light leak. And with this camera, it's even worse because there's no cover for the top, right? So on the SRs, the magazine kind of goes into a channel a little bit, and there's a little bit of a cover for it. But on this camera, there's no cover for it. There's no protection up here. So light could just go straight in and right into your gate. So be very, very cautious about this rubber seal on the outside of your camera. You want to make sure it's in good shape. Now, in terms of maintenance, I do have to mention there's a fuse on the LTR, XTR prod, and the 35III that's user serviceable. It's very easy. On the SRs, the fuse is on the base plate. So when you pull the magazine off, there's a little cap for the fuse, and there's a spare fuse in there as well. These cameras don't carry a spare fuse. A lot of guys who rent these cameras on these cameras keep a spare fuse in the box, but generally you shouldn't have a problem with fuses on set. It's not really a wear item. I found that over the years of owning these cameras, I've blown a fuse once, and it was just a random thing. It could have been a lot of different things, but it was a random thing, and the fuse blew. One fuse. I have blown a fuse on an SR before, and it was because we had a short in the power cable, so of course the fuse is going to blow. You want to keep a spare fuse on you at all times, because if the fuse were to blow on you, you would be completely screwed. It might take you days to get a new fuse. So just be very, very cautious about that, and you want to keep one on you. So that kind of is the way we deal with the camera itself. Now let's do a little bit of more work here, and let's talk about how we deal with the magazine, because the magazines are all very different, and the 35III magazine in particular is kind of a challenge. So, I have film in this magazine. So let me go ahead and pull this film out of here, because that's kind of always the fun thing about this magazine. Everybody says that's the hardest magazine in the world to load. I don't think so. I wouldn't want to load a, I wouldn't really want to load an IMAX 3D camera. Nope, not for me. So as we probably said before, the 35III, the XTR, and even the ARRI cameras have a magnetic back plate, pressure plate, that locks into place on the camera. And this one, the magnet's really easy to see. Some of the other cameras, it's not so easy to see. And so there's a gap formed based on those magnets that keeps the film so it's not so tight in the gate. Because what happens is that if the film was just being pushed against it with a spring, it would just not work as well and be a lot louder. So they leave a little tiny bit of a gap in there just for the film. And they use magnets in this camera to kind of help orient and to also space it out. They use them as spacers. And so the way we clean this is we're gonna first kind of, go through, and we're gonna kind of spray all this down, make sure there's no direct debris on this. And then we're gonna spray this down with our lens cleaner, and we're gonna kind of wipe this really, really good. Okay, we want to get in this crack here where the pull down claw goes. We want to make sure there's no dirt on this thing at all, because remember, this is pushing against your film. Now, I left some debris on there. I'm going to clean this up one more time, get rid of some of the Kim wipe debris. And now we're good to go. Now we can go ahead and load and roll film in here. Now, obviously, cleaning the inside of the magazine is easy. You're just going to spray it down with air. I wouldn't use a Kim wipe inside. There's no reason to. Just spray it down with air, make sure it's clean before you put it in the changing bag and, load film. All right, well, I can't think of anything else to talk about. This is kind of a really simple breakdown of how to kind of clean these cameras. It's really, really simple. Checking the gate, making sure that the gate is clean, making sure that your magazine pressure plate is clean. These are things that you're going to do at the end of every day, okay? You're going to check the gate, maybe if it's a good take and you want to make sure, but you want to clean the camera at the end of every day so that when you start the next morning, you've got a clean camera, clean magazines, they're ready to go. I used to preload my magazines the night before so that, when I got to set in the morning, I could just go ahead and load my film into the cameras, no problem at all. And that helped a lot because I would clean and preload that evening. And then the next day I'd be ready to go. So just be really mindful about that whole process, because a lot of people forget about cleaning their magazines and they're in a rush in the morning and they want to just have their breakfast and they want to kind of settle in for the day. And if you're rushing around trying to get the magazines loaded and clean them in the morning, it kind of is annoying. So if you get all this cleaning work done at night when the camera is ready to go, make sure you cover this. Make sure you cover up the gate at night. Make sure you put a cap on it. Make sure the camera's in the case and clean. And then in the morning, it should just be ready to go. And that's one of the best tips I can give anybody. So if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Comments are below, of course. If you have any questions, I'll respond. And I will see you next time.